And if you heard Kim this morning, she did a great job kind of previewing, going kind of through the organization with 111 members, and what we've been working on over the last few years. We were just formed in 2015. And so we put together, priorities for 2019. First and foremost is finalizing our sustainability framework. And so that's what I'm going to kind of stick with mostly today. And then kind of similar to Pip, I'm going to finish off with kind of where we're going next. And I guess when we start talking about the framework, one of the things you'll notice with our framework, just very similar to Australia, is that we have a lot of, and Pip or Tony mentioned this as well, is that they have a lot of similar components, a lot of similar what we call indicators across. And I think, again, that is a good sign that we're all working towards a common, I think, global goal of improving our global industry. So our framework has really three components. The first is high priority indicators, which is that kind of that central circle. The second layer are segment specific metrics. And then the third are what we call sustainability assessment goals. And really I explain that by saying that's kind of the guidance. That's the why, that's the how of the metrics for each segment. And so putting that all together, and we're kind of in the middle of our process, so it's not final yet. But looking at that all together, it's about close to 200 pages in if you put it all in one document. So there's a lot of information, and that's kind of our foundational piece that we're going to work from as we move forward. So I'm just going to kind of break it into these individual pieces and talk about each of them and a little bit about the process. So first are those high priority indicators. So we spent the first year identifying those issues that are important to the entire stakeholder group, so the entire membership. And we started out with, we love to talk about this, that we had around 160 different sticky notes on the wall at the beginning with different ideas, different items. And we used a technical facilitator to help guide us and help us bring those down to a more manageable number. We were highly encouraged to make it a handful of indicators so that we actually, don't bite off too much, right? Bite off as much as you can chew. So that's what we did. So we ended up with these 6 indicators. And they each have a definition associated. Some of them have multiple components, kind of like water resources. It has quality and quantity. And that again, we used some expertise here in helping us define these indicators. And those, again, they cross the entire supply chain. So then once you have those, then we moved into actually breaking ourselves up into the 5 sectors. So we have 3 producer sectors: cow-calf producers, auction markets, and feed yards. And then we have packers and processors together in one, and retail and food service together in one as well. And so what we did then, and our metrics are, what will work in your sector that gets us our best sustainability outcome, that is geographically neutral, economically feasible, technologically feasible, and has the greatest potential to make change in our industry. And some of the ground rules, we like rules in the USRSB and the US maybe in general, were that, each sector really had a lot of autonomy, and they could choose the metric that was most appropriate to them. They took input from all sectors, because you'll notice we have 2 constituency groups that aren't in these, within these sectors, which are our allied industry partners and our civil society, which includes NGOs and our research community. And those members participated in all of the different sectors and provided advice and feedback throughout the process. But at the end of the day, cow-calf producers were responsible for choosing the metrics for cow-calf producers, and retail and food service company members were responsible for choosing the metrics that would work in their sector. And so that led to some interesting things. So last fall, we put out a document called our metric summary document, and this is the top half of one of the pages of that document. And so each page was an indicator. We put the definition, and these are all draft, of course, even when we put it out. And at the top of the page are listed the 3 producer sectors, and their metrics. So it's a fairly simple, straightforward one question, for CalCAF: is a grazing management plan or equivalent being implemented that maintains or improves water resources? A grazing management plan is something that is familiar to most producers in the U.S. They kind of have some recognition of that term, which was one of the reasons that they chose that metric. And also, the other, and similarly, when they were thinking about it, that was one of the key considerations was how much can we ask, what can we ask that won't turn our cow-calf producers away. So that was one factor of many that they were considering when they chose the metric that they chose. And if we go to the other 2 sectors, packer and processor, so this is the bottom of that same page, packer and processor as well as retail and food service, they took a different approach. And they had different considerations, and this is kind of just how the process, lend itself. But the packers and processors, as well as retail and food service, knew they needed more for their sector. They needed to break out and show up a continuous improvement path for folks in their sectors. And so they decided on these levels. So they have levels 1, 2, and 3 across most of them. Some of them just have one kind of metric underneath each level. Some of them have multiple questions. And so, that was appropriate, and that's what that sector needed. And their consideration was, or their set of considerations was very different than some of the sets of considerations under the producer sectors. And the way we set up the rules really lent itself again to having different approaches, and I think we were expecting that, and we saw that. Now we got comments on from a number of people saying that they didn't like the differences in approaches, but again, that's how we set up the rules to give responsibility, and each sector is unique. And so I think we've realized, through this metric development process, exactly that's the results that we got as well. So those were the metrics, and then the final component of our framework are sustainability assessment guides, or what we call SAGs. We're really good at acronyms at USRSB. I never liked this one, just want to be on the record. So sustainability assessment guides, again, I consider that a guidance document for why we chose the metric, the sustainability outcomes that metric, if widely adopted, can have, why it can improve our industry, and then how to actually implement that metric. So each of those metrics that you saw, and I just showed you water resources, but each of them throughout the framework have an actual SAG attached to it. And again, that's what makes up the bulk of that 185 pages, are all that supporting materials, providing resources to members who fall into that sector of how to improve. When we put this out for public comment, which I'll go into a little bit more in a second, we actually put it on a website, and we tried to provide a kind of a summary of all of that information for each one. And we tried to make it, fairly easy to comment on, and you could actually comment right on the platform, or you could submit larger comments on the full document as well. So again, altogether, those are the 3 major components of our framework. And again, like I've mentioned, we put it out for public comment back in May and June. We had, I won't tell you that. I'll save that for the next slide. But we had really good feedback from a broad range of stakeholders, and that was kind of the first of 2 public comment periods. We're actually going to have a second one after revisions. We'll have one towards the end of this year as well. So, get in, and I used the wrong size slides because I noticed the stuff hiding behind it. But we had an internal comment period, for a number of internal comment periods as well prior to putting it out to public comment. We actually had over 1,000 comments from our members providing feedback, and that was outside of just the meetings that we had, in-person meetings where we received feedback as well. And then when we took it to public comment for those first 2 months, we had almost 500 comments on the framework, and I must say that I was very impressed with the quality of the comments that we did receive. So we're in the process of revising the framework based on those comments, and responding to all of those comments. So as you might imagine, it's quite a bit of work to do that. So we're still in the middle of that process at the moment. We did kind of categorize those different comments into the sectors, and then two categories, one called all sector because they were kind of applicable across the board to every single sector, and then administrative, so things that were about the organization of the document, and those sorts of things. So not surprisingly, I think we all expected this. A vast majority of the comments were in the producer sector. And then again, those administrative comments actually made up a bulk. But I will say that across all the sectors, we had some very helpful feedback, even in packer processor as well as retail and food service. So some specifics, I guess, on those comments. By far the biggest category of comments was around antibiotics, and antibiotic stewardship. And we had information included in the full document on antimicrobial stewardship and 14 judicious use guidelines. But we did receive a lot of comments, and so we're working on making that stronger as well. So we had comments on different production systems, and a lot of specific comments around grazing management plans and components of grazing management plans and considerations that people should have when they're thinking about building a grazing management plan. A lot of very helpful information and resources provided, and as well as academic references and those sorts of things. Sustainable feed, another category that we received a number of comments on. And I didn't mention this in the first round, but USRSB does have a formal partnership with another U.S. sustainability initiative called Field to Market, the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture, which is working in the row crop space. So we formalized an agreement with them to work cooperatively with them, and so that's really just started. So we did include that in there, but we're working to kind of talk about that a little more as we move forward. Greenhouse gas or methane mitigation specifically was mentioned quite a bit, as well as carbon sequestration, and more research around those areas is coming, and Pip talked about that methane as well. Under packer processor, and again, a lot of these comments can go across different sectors, but levels and tiers, and why there is a difference in the levels and tiers. And again, we're going to try to do a better job of explaining why there are different approaches between different sectors. And then we had a couple comments on wanting somewhere where they could talk about innovations and unique things that companies or individuals are doing. And then retail and food service. You might not expect deforestation to come up in the U.S., but it did quite a bit. And there were quite a few conversations around deforestation, and it's been explained many times that it may be a U.S. roundtable, but many of the U.S. companies who are part of the U.S. roundtable, especially in the retail and food service sector, are global companies that source from different countries, even though the finished product may be there in the U.S. So we've had a lot of discussions kind of moving forward with that, as well as food waste was another one that came up in retail and food service. And then I mentioned those administrative comments, and again, those are we had quite a few comments that were around asking us to lobby Congress and the administration on different issues, which is outside of the roundtable and our scope of what we do. So again, a lot of out of scope comments as well. I want to shift gears here and say that was kind of our framework to date. One of the purposes of having these breakouts is to talk about impacts on the ground. And one of the things we started last year was talking about projects and pilots. We have a process to allow people to apply to one of our committees for support of their project or pilot. We've supported officially 11 projects and pilots to date. 4 specifically are pilots, or what we consider pilots. And I'm really excited about them because I think they each are looking at something kind of unique. And I think that's fantastic. And so you see the 4 of them listed there: Integrity Beef, JBS USA, Grass Run Farms, and Keiko Isom as just kind of the simple name. Usually it means the entity that's kind of behind them, as you might imagine. So and I ask each of them to send me an update on what's going on. And so if the slides look a little different, that's why I just kind of took what everybody kind of gave me, and I'll do my best to kind of explain them. So the first one is a pilot project that's a collaborative effort with Integrity Beef, which is a program run by the Noble Research Institute that resides in the cow-calf sector. The cattle are finished by the beef marketing group largely in Kansas, and then processed by Tyson. Packer is Tyson. The processor is Golden State Foods. And then the finished product goes out in McDonald's. So that's kind of the purpose of this pilot, and this was the first one that the USRSB supported, was really to look at testing the metrics throughout the entire supply chain. So all the way from farm to fork, as we might say, right? And so it's been going on for about a year, a little over, I think. And they're in the process of developing some self-assessment tools that can be used by each sector to date. And then they have some initial data. And they're sending that back through the supply chain to tell the cow-calf producer how the calves perform in the feedlot and on the rail, which is something that we struggle with in the United States, I think, is communicating up and down the supply chain. They're sending out a survey to cow-calf producers on the metrics, again, trying to get feedback on the indicators and metrics and how those really function, on the ground. And then lastly, again, they're signing up more producers right now for a second year. And again, one of the things that we ask for when applications are submitted is to get results and to help us communicate those results. So the second pilot I will go through and is the JBS USA Feedyard pilot. And this one really focuses on at scale. So 2.9 million head of fed cattle, which is over half of the fed cattle supply. So really they're trying to look at the framework and just in that sector, but look at it at almost full scale, right? So so they've started this project this summer. And so far, they've had great participation by Feedyard owners and operators, which is great to hear. And I guess one of the heartening things is that Feedyard owners and operators were really eager to talk about their story and tell us what's going on. And they did address some of those topics and best management practices at all of the feedyards that participated. And just like Kim did this morning, I will invite you personally to Fresno, warm Fresno, California. We'll have an exciting tour there as well, but it's into April, beginning of May of 2019, so you're all more than welcome to come.